afternoon and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. In September 2022, the tragic death of a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, at the hands of Iran's morality police sparkled something extraordinary. What began as outrage over the treatment of one woman quickly erupted into a national uprising led by women and girls demanding dignity, justice, and freedom. Their rallying cry, Women Life Freedom, has become a global symbol of resistance. Today, we are joined by someone who has chronicled this defining movement with a great clarity and conviction, Mr. Jonathan Harounoff. Mr. Harounoff is Israel's international spokesperson to the United Nations and senior communication advisor for Israel's mission to the UN. His new book, Unveiled, Inside Iran's Women Life Freedom Revolt, take us deep into the heart of this movement, honoring the courage of Iranians and examining the uprising's lasting global implications. The book is now available for pre-order on Amazon, Waterstones, and other major retailers in the UK. So check out the link in the description box below to learn more. Thank you so much, Mr. Hanno, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Raj.
So I would like to begin the conversation by asking that what was your major motivation behind writing this book, and what has been your experience regarding this critical moment?
Sure. Well, I have a personal and a professional interest and connection to this region and to this topic. My family on both sides come from the region, come from Iran. My grandparents um, grew up in the holy city of Mashhad, and they left a while before the 79 revolution. So growing up, that's always been an interest of mine. I've been surrounded by the language, the culture, the food of Iran, and growing up in the UK and working in the US, it's always been a fascination of mine, learning more about the Middle East, learning more about Iran, about Israel, about the languages in the region, including Arabic. And it's always been a fascination of mine. I covered Iran as a journalist for about 7 years before taking on this current role. And during that time, this extraordinary uprising took place where we saw this isolated incident, or what appeared to be an isolated incident, of a young woman who was just visiting Tehran with her family get accosted by the country's morality police, get arrested, beaten to a pulp, fall into a coma, and 3 days later, on September the 16th, 2022, be declared dead. And I say it would look like an isolated incident, but it wasn't really, because many other women in Iran suffered the same thing, although many of them did end up coming home. And this incident of the Mahsa Amini's death uh, sparked an enormous uprising nationwide and globally as well. We saw women and men marched in the streets. We saw women cut off their hair in solidarity inside Iran and abroad, and we saw expressions and actions of sympathy and solidarity all over the world. And Women Life Freedom that you mentioned became a rallying cry, not just in Iran but across the world. We saw this in the White House, Downing Street, the United Nations, from London, Berlin, Sydney. We saw female foreign dignitaries, celebrities, members of parliament cut off their hair in this global echo of grief and solidarity. And during this time, what I wanted to do is interview the people most involved on the ground inside Iran and in the diaspora, understand how this came about, what the context was in this coming about, and also look more broadly at the history of uprisings inside Iran, because even though the Islamic Republic is just 46 years old, it's faced quite a lot of turmoil. This wasn't the first uprising, but it perhaps was the most devastating, and it brought the Islamic Republic to its heels, even though it didn't ultimately succeed. So the reason why I wrote this book was I wanted to track in comprehensive detail the origins, the successes, the shortcomings, and the legacy of this historic movement. And I feel like it's become extra timely given what we've seen in the region in the past month, with direct clashes between Israel and Iran, and where we saw this talk emerge once again of whether or not there could be regime change, what that would look like, and rather than rely on some of the takes of observers outside of Iran, um, I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to speak to people most intensely involved in this, people who could actually comment on what's the likelihood of regime change, what would that look like, and what do they want their Iran to look like post Ayatollah.
Yeah, so you talked about regime change and Islamic Republic. So, what institutional and legal structures within the Islamic Republic have enabled gender-based repression, and what policy reforms would be essential to dismantle them in a future democratic Iran if there is a possibility of regime change? And what are your thoughts on this idea of regime change as somebody who represents Israel in the United Nations?
Well, the first thing to make clear is that regime change was never an objective of the Israeli government when it launched the preemptive Operation Rising Lion. That was absolutely never the goal. The goal was to eliminate a very imminent, immediate threat Israel was facing as the Islamic Republic was building this destructive nuclear program and as it was amassing this enormous arsenal of ballistic missiles, along with very concrete plans to annihilate the state of Israel that had been worked on by senior military officials, nuclear scientists, and other people. That's why Israel launched this attack, and that's also why the United States later on launched Operation Midnight Hammer, because they too face a very strategic threat from Iran, and uh, and the Islamic Republic has made no secret of its desire to annihilate not just little Satan, Israel, but to also destroy the great Satan as well, the United States. Um, Having said all of that, I don't think I think it's important to note, and the thing that gets lost in conversation is just how resilient and uh, how much of a survival instinct the Islamic Republic actually does have. It's important to know that it itself was born of a revolution in 1979, and it has survived um, a lot of issues internally and externally for the past 46 years. It knows what it takes to survive uprisings and turmoil, which is why it's still there, and it mostly does that through unrelenting repression of its own people whenever it senses uprisings, arresting them, executing them, disappearing them, and especially when it's weakened militarily against a country like Israel and the United States, it unfortunately takes a lot of it out on its own people. And that's what we've seen in recent weeks, where there have been unprecedented volumes of arrests of Iranian people. There's been this program of deportation of people from Afghanistan out of Iran. Um, and to your earlier question of what regime change would look like and how feasible it is, ultimately that would be the decision of the people of Iran. I think the last thing the people of Iran want is external forces to dictate what their country would look like. And what they expect from the international community is not an imposed regime change. What they expect is international support and concrete actions taken that demonstrate solidarity, such as a severing of ties with the regime, whether that be through sanctions, through a cutting of trade, through isolation. But the last thing they want is an actual imposed regime change.
Yeah, so now coming to international actors, how can international actors, particularly the Western governments and multilateral bodies, support the women life freedom movement without undermining its legitimacy or fueling regime propaganda about foreign interference? Because in in Islamic Republic, as you are very well aware, that there is a rhetoric against the foreign interference.
Yeah, and that's something that the Islamic Republic has played on for decades. The fact that the United States and the UK have and other countries have long interfered and meddled in the affairs. Um, but we saw, just by using the 2022-2023 protests as an example, we did see international governments try and offer support and solidarity in their houses of parliament, statements by their leaders, but it was limited. So there were a lot of expressions of solidarity, a lot of meaningful ones that did mean a lot, but that wasn't always followed by tangible action. And by tangible action, what I alluded to earlier, um, cutting ties with the Islamic Republic. At the UN specifically, we're approaching a conversation about the reimposition of sanctions on Iran with the snapbacks coming up in mid-October, and that will be extremely important, an extremely important moment in deciding, what kind of relationship these nations have with the Islamic Republic. Will they continue to pressure them, isolate them, impose these sanctions on them, or will they try and engage in some kind of concessionary diplomacy that we've seen not work in the past with the Islamic Republic? The only kind of diplomacy that we've seen work with them is a kind of hostage diplomacy that we saw right at their infancy in 79 with the 444-day US embassy hostage crisis. And we've seen its proxies since then, and the Islamic Republic itself continue to engage in this kind of very lucrative hostage diplomacy. We saw it with Hamas, where they stole more than 250 Israelis and foreign nationals from Gaza on October the 7th, and when they still hold 50 people hostage. And we've seen the Islamic Republic continue to take foreign nationals, Americans, hostage because they know that it's good business. They know that countries will end up paying up in order to retrieve their loved ones, because that's what good democracy does.
Yeah, you talked about sanctions. So, in what way have sanctions and diplomatic isolation helped the internal women-led resistance in Iran? And should the international policy framework be rethought to better support the civil society over there?
Well, there have been studies by a certain think tank. So one that I particularly like is an organization in DC based in DC called Nufti, and they've shown how there's a very direct correlation between um, sanctions being imposed on the United States on the Islamic Republic and executions inside Iran declining. And then you've seen an inverse of that where the more Western governments engage with Iran, the more emboldened it feels to continue to carry out its dangerous foreign policy agenda, but also impose greater repression on its own people. And when you see more like engagement externally with the Islamic Republic, you've seen also an uptick of executions inside Iran. So I, have as I work at the United Nations for Israel, diplomacy is always the best course of action, the first course of action. But when it's been exhausted and when you try and use the same approach over and over again and expect different results, that's an issue. And time and again, as history has shown that the kind of traditional diplomacy that one would prefer doesn't work on the Islamic Republic, and it only speaks and responds to a different kind of approach.
Yeah, so Iranian foreign minister and Iranian ambassador to the UN have often called for diplomacy. So, where do you think there is a gap between thought leadership and actual impact?
I think those representatives have called for diplomacy, have also claimed that they were engaged in, nuclear negotiations while this all took place. But what we've seen the Islamic Republic do is it's very shrewd at prolonging these discussions and negotiations while also continuing its own destructive plans. So while all of these nuclear negotiations were taking place, the regime was still very much building its nuclear program, still very much finalizing its plans to destroy Israel. It was still very much continuing its sponsorship and financing and green lighting of the actions of Hamas and its other proxies in the region. So if this truly was a regime that did care about peace, did care about real nuclear negotiations in pursuit of a freer Middle East, it wouldn't have been doing all of this other stuff and using diplomacy as a cover to advance its own dangerous foreign policy agenda.
Yeah. So what role can diaspora communities, because you talked about that, how you also spoke to people who are living in exile and diaspora. So what role can diaspora communities and exile media play in shaping a current political vision for a post-Islamic Republic Iran, and how should policymakers engage with them responsibly?
I think that's one of the biggest tragedies of Iran's last 50 years of history or so. There are so many extraordinary Iranians in the diaspora today that would have otherwise wanted to or grown up and thrived and contributed to society inside Iran. And that's one of the key topics I talk about in the book, that there's been this massive brain drain of generations of amazing Iranians who, instead of living in Iran, building that country up, building its economy, have ended up building contributing to societies elsewhere. Now we see Iranians, uh, CEOs and leaders of government and key business people, and all of these people could have been in Iran. But they play a tremendous role in all of this because even though the Islamic Republic does have tentacles out and reach and agents and cells outside of Iran, they are still in greater relative safety to the people inside Iran. So they are a huge um, uh, facilitator of change. And we saw that in the 2022 uprising when they were able to galvanize huge numbers of people in the diaspora, with rallies and with communications with people inside Iran. So they play a tremendous role. They are really the vessel and the main conduit between the outside world and the people of Iran, because they have a connection to both.
Yeah. So, given the movement's decentralized youth-led nature and also women-led nature, how can democratic movements transition from protest to political organization in an environment that brutally suppresses dissent? And how difficult is it for the protesters in Iran to actually carry out these protests? And what legal frameworks are still there in Iran in order to protect them from those?
I think there are pros and cons to a decentralized kind of protest network that we saw inside Iran and that you may see elsewhere. I think the pros of a decentralized network of protests is that it's much harder for a tyrannical regime to stamp down because they don't know what the beating heart of the movement is. At the same time, it means that you're less organized. It can get a bit chaotic. Um, on the flip side, if you have a centralized system of protests, everything is going through one funnel, and it can be much more organized, can have much more impact, but what you become a much greater target. So all it takes is for a brutal regime to take out the central figure, the central the heart of that movement, and that could really destabilize the whole thing. In the 2022-2023 protest movement, it was very much decentralized. There wasn't a single leader or group of leaders inside Iran to have emerged, and that was what allowed the protests to really spread very quickly. From September 16th, 2022, when Mahsa Amini was declared dead, within a few days, the uprising had spread to almost all of Iran's 31 provinces, and it had also spread internationally. There were people staging protests with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in some of the major city centers in Europe, in Berlin, also in Canada and elsewhere. And that was very much attributed to the decentralized nature of this protest movement. I think it was important to have been decentralized because no single person, I guess, at the time could have sort of claimed sole responsibility for this movement. It was the kind of thing that so many people inside Iran and Iranians in the diaspora resonated with. So many of them have suffered at the hands of the Islamic Republic that they all wanted a part of it. They all wanted to take part in it. And I think that was the beauty of that movement. Even though it didn't fulfill its ultimate objective of unseating the regime, it did have tremendous success.
Yeah, and what mechanisms of transitional justice and constitutional reform would be necessary to ensure that gender equality and human rights are maintained in the foundation of a future Iranian state?
I think there's no question that a lot of change would need to happen for all of those things for there to be a much more gender equal Iran. But all of those things will have to be decided by the people of Iran. There are certain leaders who, who want to facilitate Iran and bring it to the point. You'd sort of be transition leaders and bring the country and the people to a point where they can decide. But any sort of meaningful constitutional, institutional change that we see will not and should not be decided or imposed by people outside of Iran. It should be decided by the people of Iran who are affected by this the most. So I don't want to suggest any kind of system, but what's clear is that the current system doesn't work for the people of Iran, and they've shown that multiple times in the past 46 years, and only they will decide what their Iran looks like. And also I don't expect that there's a very clear consensus that every single person agrees on what kind of Iran they want. Some people may want, a representative democracy. Some people may want a return to the monarchy. Some people may want another form, a republic. Some people may want something else. So it will be very much up to the people of Iran to decide.
Yeah, and what would be the next step of Israeli government and Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs when it comes to Iran, especially after the bombing of the nuclear sites? And where do you see future going in terms of Iran-Israel relations?
The Islamic Republic still poses a considerable threat, but that immediate imminent threat was eliminated. We remain on very high alert on its actions directly and also through its proxies, and any necessary future steps that need to be taken will be taken. But I personally dream of a future Iran where we can see the people of Iran and the people of Israel really rekindle that natural alliance and friendship that they did once enjoy, that has been sort of really shut out by the Islamic Republic. I hope that we can once again see direct flights between Tehran and Tel Aviv through El Al, which was what we did see pre 1979. And I just imagine the kind of collaboration that you could see take place between these two great countries if the Islamic Republic was out the picture. And that's why, even though now it seems quite inconceivable for that to happen, it's really not. And that's why there's been so much momentum around not just an expansion of the Abraham Accords, but a kind of rekindling of the Cyrus Accords, uh, alluding to a potential rapprochement between the people of Iran and the people of Israel.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, what message would you like to leave our viewers with regarding your book Unveiled and the movement it captures?
That I think the book is an extremely important read. Whenever you look at news of Iran on the media, it almost invariably always looks at what Iran's foreign policy is, what it's doing, relative to the world. Very rarely do you see news or like an inside look of what's going on inside Iran with the people of Iran, and this is what this book really tries to capture. And I spent 3 years writing on the book, so even though the book now is extremely timely, spent 3 years writing the book, but it is extremely timely and it's very relevant to conversations we're having today. And if you want a better understanding of what the people of Iran are thinking and how different they are to the Islamic Republic of Iran, I highly recommend ordering the book. The people of Iran are a civilization that's existed for 2,500 years. The Islamic Republic is a blip. It's a 46-year-old regime, and there are so many differences between those two that are really important to distinguish that not enough people do. And I think this book can help illuminate that.
Yeah, that brings us the end of this powerful and insightful conversation. The Women Life Freedom Movement is not just a protest, it's a profound call for justice, equality, and dignity. We hope this conversation shed light on the courage of the Iranian people, especially its women and girls, and the global responsibility to stand in solidarity with them. Don't forget the link to the book is attached in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you so much once again, Mr. Harounoff, for your time.
Thank you, Raj, so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.